fan, Brian Kelly, of course, has the high school and college connection with me. Went to the same high school and same college.
That's absurd. You know
Always,
that's absurd.
always going to defend him. And not just defend him, but he is a man who, as I've mentioned probably on your program before, whose very first head coaching job was the head softball coach at Assumption, then Assumption College, a Division II softball team. That was where Brian Kelly got his first head coaching gig. But Notre Dame, they've made me very sad over the last couple of years, Swanee, and I can't follow the team like I used to. So maybe that's probably a good thing.
Well, I wanted to ask you this about the Fighting Irish. So, every once in a while in this business, I'm going to put that comment up for people to give us their thoughts on the ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12, they came together. I have no idea. But they are a team that I believe if they were in the ACC might change the complete narrative about this conference. Like, even though people hate on Notre Dame, I mean, they play a great schedule. But if they were in the conference, right now the ACC would have what? 4 teams in the top 15, I think was the number I looked at earlier. 3 teams in the top 10. I mean, that's the same as the SEC right now. And I'm not saying that Notre Dame could, push their weight around in the SEC by any means, but dude, people don't give them credit for playing Southern Cal, for going out and hooking up with Texas A&M in a couple of years, or playing Georgia. I mean, they take on all comers. I give them credit for that.
And I think that's one of the things, Swan. I think here's the deal. Why do people hate Notre Dame? Well, I think it goes back many, many years. But I think more than anything is because the rest of the college football world looks at them as people that kind of just put their nose up to everyone else. Right? They are an independent school. They have their contract deal with NBC. And for a long period of time, people just perceive them to be people that think of themselves better than other people. And I think that's just a funny term because that's something I feel like I hear more and more between Clemson and USC fans. USC fans, they think they're better than me. They think they got a better job because they're up in Clemson. And then, Clemson, the Gamecock fan, you shut up, both of you. Jesus, bickering. It's like listening to freaking two, children go back and forth. So there you go. Gamecock and Clemson fans can come to an agreement and hate me there. But I say all that because that has kind of been the narrative with Notre Dame. And I think with Notre Dame, because of who they are, they don't have this conference support, right? And I don't think there's, every conference has like the ACC. If Clemson doesn't do well, I'm not saying Clemson fans are going to be cheering for Miami if they make a deep run in the college football playoffs or North Carolina, but they don't really have that conference support. And I think because of that added element, it's really easy to hate on Notre Dame when they haven't had the success in the college football playoff, because they have had success in the regular season. They're kind of like an Oklahoma in a lot of ways. They have success in the regular season. They are a very good team. But once they get to the college football playoff and they play against some of the elite teams in the country, they've just kind of, let themselves go down their pants, to keep it PG. And I think that's another reason why it's easy to gain up on them, is just because they haven't lived up to the expectations of the old days of Notre Dame. Plus, like I said, they think that they're better. At least that's the perception that people have of everyone else. And it's easy to make fun of people like that.
Again, in both the coaches poll and the AP poll, they're a top 10 team. If they were in the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC would have 3 teams in the top 10. So too would the SEC. How different would that make the Atlantic Coast Conference in your eyes if every year they had that additional top 10 team in the mix?
Well, I think that's the way you got to look at it every year, because going into this season, for all the flack that the ACC has got over the last couple of years, on paper at least going in, this is a very good conference. Is it SEC caliber? No, not by any means. But at the same time, too, the people that just absolutely crap on the ACC, enough. You can't say that this year, at least going into the season. We'll have to see how things play out. But for Clemson, I mean, they have a very tough schedule in comparison to how things have played out the last couple of years. And that's a good thing, because they've heard the narrative, you just play cupcakes. Well, they have Georgia to start off the year, and then they have these other teams in the conference. But if they were to have Notre Dame year in and year out, Notre Dame is a team that will be in the mix every year. I can't see them just falling off the map and not being a team that will be ranked in the top 25 over I'll make this up, a kind of like a 3-year period. I'd be shocked over a 2-year period. They will be in the mix in some degree, in some fashion. And if they are playing in a conference, I'm sure there's some people that are listening now, whether they're ACC fans or, SEC fans, or maybe a fan of a different conference. Well, if you're in a conference, there's no way they're going to be able to back that up. I disagree with that because I feel like they've proven that based on the teams that they've played. Now, look, bottom line is when you look at the top to bottom of the schedule, is it like the SEC? Is it like the way it's set up for Clemson this year? No, but they have scheduled tough games. Sometimes they don't win some of those games. We've seen that, whether it be Texas, whether it be Georgia over the last couple of years. But I think having Notre Dame in your conference helps the conference, and it helps you in particular if you are Clemson because of all the grief you've been getting over the last couple of years about how soft the schedule is. Well, that's not the case this year, but if Notre Dame were in the mix, it makes it that much stronger.
Mike Uva, again, Watch Fox 57. He joins us every Tuesday afternoon. So before we get into the serious question, I'll ask you the one that's up on the screen, Mike. What would you call the ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 if they did, instead of just partnering and scheduling, if they actually joined together? Do you like the Big Pac Coast Conference? Is that terrible?
The Big Pac Coast Conference. You kind of be putting me on the spot here. I'm really bad with names. I think back. I'm going to give myself some time. I'm going to think back to the days I played wiffle ball in the backyard and make up names. One of the best names was Pawnee Limestone. So I'm trying to think of a good name here of a batter. So what would this conference be? Well, you can't call it Atlantic, because it would cross. So I think if you want to keep coast in there, but then again, the Big Ten is in the middle of the country. So can you really call it coast?
You know what one person suggested when it was just the Pac-12 conversation in the ACC, and this might even work for this, the American Coast Conference, because you got the coast and you're covering the America.
I don't hate it. The American Coast Conference.
Coast to coast.
The ACC, and it's ACC, so the others would still be there. So if you're a fan of putting, if you're one of those people for whatever reason that wears an ACC hat around, there you go.
Let me get it out of the closet.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. So honestly, though, I was talking on Monday when this news the news kind of came out over the weekend, and then I have a couple of days so I can talk about it. So just getting into it. Yesterday, I was thinking, man, how does this affect Notre Dame? But then I looked at their schedule. Dude, they play 5 teams from the ACC. They play 2 teams from the Pac-12. They play 2 teams from the Big Ten. I would make the argument that this conversation is not one that's necessarily negative for the Fighting Irish, is it?
No, I think the bottom line is this, Swanee. We have seen and will continue to see college football shift, right? You think back to the days when you had the old BCS formula. Then obviously now we're in the college football playoff era. It's going to continue to switch. And the question now is, as we see the SEC beginning to expand, adding Texas, adding Oklahoma, the question now is, when do we get to a point with the expansion of the college football playoff, which is inevitable, as you put on your ACC hat, the American Coast Conference, the future American Coast Conference hat right there, the ACC for our but the question is, at some point, does playing in a conference, is that going to benefit you? And I think the answer is going to be yes. Because when you look at what the SEC is doing right now, I would be shocked if you expand to 8 and you don't have an automatic buy-ins, you win your conference, you're in the playoff. I think at some point you're going to have to look at it and be like, shoot, what the SEC is doing right now, and you look, for top to bottom, that's obviously the toughest conference. We've said that for years, but now you have Oklahoma and Texas in the mix. I just think there's going to be a higher rate, the possibility of that rate of seeing more teams from that conference go. So at some point, you look at Notre Dame and you start questioning maybe, hey, are we going to reward this team who potentially might not be playing as many of these Power 5 teams, depending on how other conferences kind of form? Because if you have to, like for the SEC, they might expand to play another conference game. That is a strong possibility, because if you're going to add Texas and Oklahoma in the mix, they might say, you know what? Money talks, baby. Why are we going to have you go play TikTok Tech when we can make you play another team, which we saw last year, and that was different circumstances for the COVID. We can get more money. And if the other conferences, whether they have an alliance or whatever they want to call it, they start to form their own thing, what are they going to want to do? Because money is going to be a huge factor, especially TV dollars. They're going to say, hey, we're going to make you play an extra conference game as well. Notre Dame could be left in the dark if they don't join a conference. So that's why I think it is inevitable at some point that they will join a conference, because if not, I'm not saying it's going to be like a UCF or Cincinnati situation, because we know what Notre Dame means historically. But at some point, that name recognition won't get you into the college football playoff if your resume isn't as strong as some of these other teams that are in conferences.
Again, he's Mike Uve, joins us each and every Tuesday to talk a little college football. Now, the other side of this to me became how I felt like this was terrible news for the remaining 8 teams of the Big 12, because I feel like, and I brought this up earlier, if you look at the Big 12 in 1998, Nebraska's gone, Colorado's gone, Texas gone, Texas A&M gone, Oklahoma gone. Like, that's probably the 5 biggest brands in that league that have left the venue, and you add in Missouri, who's also left since then. And I thought to myself, why would the SEC, like, what value would the SEC see necessarily in playing the teams that are left? I mean, I hate to say it, because it's going to sound like I'm really dissing these schools, but it's Oklahoma State. That's probably the biggest brand remaining. It's Kansas, Baylor, it's TCU. I don't see an advantage for those teams at all in some kind of conglomerate forming between these other 3 Power 5 leagues.
No, and why would it be? Why should it be? You know, the problem is this. Football is always going to be the driving force, right? We know that. And what Frank Martin mentioned just a couple of weeks ago, right before this announcement of the SEC taking on Texas and Oklahoma, this is also going to have an impact on basketball. It's also going to have an impact on baseball. We know those are the big 3, football, basketball, baseball, but it'll also impact other sports as well. The question now is being able to bring in an Oklahoma State, to bring in some of these other schools, is that going to move the needle? And that's the question that you ask yourself, whether you're a commissioner or whether you're someone working from the TV side of it. I mean, those people are a hell of a lot smarter than me. I don't know exactly what the formula, the Excel sheets, all the things that you got to look at to determine that. But the question is going to be kind of like a free agent in a sense. If these teams are trying to leave, this is hypothetically speaking here, so buckle up for a minute as I give you a popsicle headache. If these teams are trying to leave and it's kind of like a free agent and you're the commissioner of the Super League, how do you look at that? Do you look at it strictly based on football, or do you look at it in other sports as well? Because, we can look at some teams across the country. It doesn't have to necessarily be the Big 12. But, I mean, a team like Kansas, we know they move the needle for basketball. Football? Kansas football, they haven't been relevant in years. Really? So, football will always be the thing that will drive the force. But at some point, when you're looking at these super leagues that are potentially could happen down the line, how much of the other sports will have an impact? To me, not that much. But, I mean, shoot, if a Kansas is out there as a free agent team in one of these super conferences, I mean, it's not a bad fit to have for basketball. The question is, will that move the needle big picture-wise if their football team's not playing that well?
Only about 2 minutes left, actually a little less than that. Let me ask you about the situation at quarterback with South Carolina. Luke Doty suffered an injury late last week. I've heard that his potential status for the beginning of the season is still in question. What's the latest on that front, Mike? Because I know you got the scoop.
Yeah, the initial diagnosis was it was a mid-foot fracture and some minor ligament damages to that foot. The good news is once they were able to see the swelling go down, the second opinion came in, and it was just a mid-foot sprain, which is the minor ligament damages. Doty spoke today. He took the scooter. He went to the podium, had a cast on that left foot. He's hoping that it'll come off in a couple of days. USC is so thin at quarterback. Get this. Their grad assistant, Zeb Nolan, who was a quarterback at